This is very interesting stuff. One of the things this man touches on in this clip is something I thought a lot about post COVID and post like kind of just being exposed to the reality of how just absolutely corrupt and terrible things have gotten on so many levels. I doubt things I was taught now as a kid. I mean, I seriously doubt a lot of stuff now that I'm like, yeah, I don't know now. I don't know if I buy that. Like now, the stuff that was in that I was taught about this part of history or that part of history. Like I really want to do some, and I read People's History of the United States. I've read Howard Zinn. I didn't, who didn't after watching Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting? That was a joke. But point being is this guy has some really interesting shit to tell you about cults. And I think that when I started watching this, I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. But then it got really interesting right about at this point. So check this out. Like, let's listen to this real quick. I like to share this with you.
Just an easy example, if you like rock music, it just basically modern rock and roll basically came from the Haight-Ashbury in the basically mid to late 60s, and then from Laurel Canyon, which was another one of these sort of cultish environments in the mid to late 60s. And there was like specific moments in time in both of these places. And
I spent plenty of time in Laurel Canyon myself, so I do not work for the CIA.
Basically all of the great rock and roll from that era that determined everything that followed basically came out of this. So, do you want that or not?
Right.
If you want it, that's what you get. I'll give you, here's a crazy, there's the other book about Laurel Canyon that's even crazier than Chaos. It's the book called Weird Scenes in the Canyon. Okay. You would love this one. So Laurel Canyon was like the Haight-Ashbury of Los Angeles, right? So Laurel Canyon was like the music scene, the sort of music and drug and hippie scene of Laurel Canyon's actually where the hippie movement started. There was actually a specific group in Laurel Canyon in LA in about 1965. There was a guy named Vito Polikas, and he had a group called the Freaks, and they were like a non-violent version of the Manson cult, and it was all these young girls, and they basically would go to clubs, and they were the ones to do the beads and the hair and like all the leather and like all the hippie stuff. Like they got that rolling. And so like they were in Laurel Canyon, and in Laurel Canyon it was like ground zero. There was like this moment where it's like Jim Morrison, The Doors, and Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Frank Zappa, and was it John Phillips, was the Mamas and the Papas, and the Byrds, and the Monkees, and like all of these
the Byrds and the Monkees
of that time basically catalyzed over about a 2-year period in Laurel Canyon. The conspiracy theory in this book basically is that the whole thing was an op, and
listen to this. This is crazy.
It was a military intelligence op, and the evidence for the theory is that there was an Air Force military propaganda production facility at the head of Laurel Canyon called Lookout Mountain, which today Jared Leto owns and actually lives
so I was just going to say that.
Yeah, but it was in that era in the 50s through the 70s, it was a vertically integrated military. Yes, it was a production facility for film and music.
But by the way, have you met Jared Leto?
I briefly, yeah.
One of
this is so interesting too.
The most interesting guys I've ever talked to.
Incredible, and it makes total sense.
Totally normal, like really fun to talk to. Not like what you would think of as a famous actor at all. I had dinner with him and drinks.
What the hell's Joe Rogan having dinner and drinks with Jared Leto for? What are you guys planning? How come Jared Leto should be on Joe Rogan's podcast? That would be interesting.
Fucking great guy.
But he lives in a military...
he showed me all the pictures. He showed me. I'm like, this is wild.
Yeah, so
it's amazing.
If you believe the moon landing was faked, this is where they faked it. Like this is.
I thought they're supposed to do it in the Nevada desert.
No, these are the sound because they had sound stages. They had totally contained sound stages. They had full sound production capability. And so the theory goes basically. There were 3 parts to the conspiracy theory. So one is they had the production facility right there, right where all these musicians showed up. 2 is the musicians, like a very large percentage of these young musicians, were sons and daughters of senior U.S. military and intelligence officials. Including Jim Morrison, whose father was the head of naval operations for the Vietnam War at the time. And there were these other...
How crazy is that? I had no idea.
I forget which ones, but there were these other musicians at the time where their parents were like senior in like military, like psychological operations. And like that's all real, like that's all documented. And then third is the head of the Rand Corporation, who was one of the inspirations for the Dr. Strangelove character in the movie. So he was the guy doing all the nuclear planning for nuclear war. He lived right in the heart of the hippies in Laurel Canyon.
Whoa.
In this famous house that's still there. And so the theory basically goes that the anti-war movement before the hippies was basically a square movement. It was all these basically young people, very clean cut. The men were all wearing, if you look at old like Vietnam War protests, like everybody's all like dressed up like they're going to a business meeting. It was developing into a real threat. And so the theory is the hippie movement and rock and roll and the drug culture of the 60s was developed in order to basically sabotage the anti-war movement.
Wow.
Right. Which basically is what happened, right? Because then what happened is the anti-war movement became associated with the hippies, and that caused Americans to decide what side they were on, and then that led to Nixon being elected twice.
Which was also a part of chaos, because that was the idea behind the Manson family and funneling acid to them.
So I feel like we've come full circle here, and that kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning with this whole lack of consistency and the Democrats defending, you know, their guy doing stuff that they would otherwise be freaking out about, and also just becoming right wing and pro war. And now it's suddenly because Trump was against war. It's like what he described just now with the hippies, how they used hippies to discredit, you know, opposition to the war. That's being done today with right wing, right? Like right wing or like white supremacist is like the new way to like discredit any criticism of the power structure. And you see it with like, you know, people like Ice Cube, for example. This woman that Jimmy had on his show the other day, who's part of the SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, who's trying to fight like COVID mandates, is a black woman. And she was talking about, you know, she alluded to being associated with a white supremacist movement, or being like called white supremacist. She's a black woman, you know. Anyway, let's listen to a little bit more of this before we close out here.
The facility was equipped with a soundstage, screening rooms, film storage vaults, and naturally a bomb shelter. During its 22 years of operation, Lookout Mountain Laboratory produced approximately 6,500 classified films for the Department of Defense and the Atomic Energy Commission, documenting nuclear test series such as Operation Greenhouse, Operation Teapot, and Operation Buster Jangle.
So one of the conspiracy theories. Okay, here's another conspiracy theory. You've seen all the grainy footage of nuclear test blasts that you've you know,
sure.
With the mushroom clouds, and there are always these grainy things, and there's all these like little houses lined up and these little trees lined up, and that blows everything down. Well, there's always been a conspiracy theory that those were all basically fabricated at this facility, that those bombs actually were never detonated, and that basically the U.S. military was basically faking these bomb tests to freak out the Russians, to make us think that we had weapons. We had basically a potency to our nuclear weapon arsenal that we actually didn't have at the time.
How did they fake it?
They just did. Yeah, exactly.
So this is
exactly.
it?
Well, so there's okay, so here's a question, right? So what happened? Okay, so this is great. Okay, you'll love this. So what happened to the camera?
You son of a bitch. You son of a bitch.
How is that happening, yet the camera is like totally stable and fine?
Oh my God.
And by the way, and the film is fine. The radiation didn't cause any damage to the film.
Oh my God.
This looks like how you shoot.
And by the way, okay, we'll do this one. We'll do the loop one more time here. Let's see the car.
The car's right behind the house. It just showed up.
Oh,
okay.
It just showed up.
So wait a minute. First of all,
wasn't there.
First of all, where'd the car come from?
Yeah. No car.
Second is, does it really look like
car?
A real, does that look like a real car?
That's insane.
And look at the and look at when the house blows. Look at the wood. Does that look like those are full size, like, you know, giant lumber beams as they go flying? Yeah.
That's hard to say.
Is that a house, or is that like, is that a 12-inch scale model?
What?
Right. So like
the fucking car.
Anyway, I don't know. Like, I have no idea. Having said that, if that was fake, it was faked at Lookout Mountain.
Wow.
Right, at the exact same place and time.
But did they have the kind of special effects to do something like that in the 40s?
Well, so the full conspiracy theory is it was Stanley Kubrick. Which again, I have no idea.
Boy, that does look fake.
There's also the camera didn't move at all either.
You know what it looks like? Go back to that real quick. It looks like the smoke is too big. Watch when it hits.
So a few years ago, I have a friend who's a big film geek. And I mean, I'm not a super big film geek, but you know, a few years ago, a film geek friend of mine showed me this movie. I think it's called like Room 223 or something like that, but it's about Kubrick and all these hidden symbols in his films. And according to this documentary, or this is kind of like I don't know if it was a documentary, it was an interesting movie, but it was about how kind of like subversive Kubrick was, and supposedly the movie The Shining is about what white people did to the American Indians, like how white people brutalized the American Indians when they, you know, came to the United States. And this movie, it's really good, actually. In fact, I kind of want to watch it again now. But it points out the symbolisms in The Shining, you know, and it has it's a pretty well constructed conspiracy theory. I don't even know if you call it a conspiracy theory. It's really just like a theory about the art itself, right? But what he said about Kubrick doing these nuclear films, at the end of that movie, they start talking about how Kubrick, because of the movie 2001: Space Odyssey, the CIA used him to fake the moon landing. And I was just like, that's when the movie kind of lost me. I was like, oh, come on, you guys and your fake moon landing shit. But I mean, at this point in time, show me some credible evidence, you know, like I'm not, nothing's out of the question at this point. Who knows, you know, who knows? Maybe it was fake. Maybe like he said, with this Lookout Mountain stuff, like they did this stuff to scare the Russians. I could see I mean, if we're good at anything, it's making movies. You know, the United States we invented movies. You know, it's like we're the media. We control the media. United States controls the media. I mean, with the internet, just think about it. You know, it's our pipes, bro. I mean, not really, but you know what I mean. It's kind of like the internet, the inception, the mass connectivity that we have today with cell phone technology and the internet was all enabled in Silicon Valley, right here in California, folks. And what these people are talking about at Lookout Mountain is just right, you know, a few miles to the east of me.